Thank you for viewing this Technical Assistant Workshop video. All slides presented in this video, along with the associated links, are available to download in a 508 conformant PDF file on the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities website. To download the PDF file, visit www.nimhd.nih.gov/funding/NIMHD funding/webinars.html. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Welcome everyone to the Technical Assistance webinar for RFA-OD-22-011, the Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics Tribal Data Repository. I'm Dottie Castile, and I'm the program officer assigned to this project. The purpose of this technical assistance webinar is to share information that will assist you in preparing a strong application to this funding opportunity to increase the likelihood of your success and to respond to your questions. I want you to know that we are recording this technical assistance webinar, and the webinar will be posted on the NIMHD website with a link to this on the Tribal Health Research Office website. Okay, I see that there are now a number of people entering the room, and we will begin. Next slide, please. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon, and I'd like to begin by talking about a couple of housekeeping tips. We are keeping all mics muted and request that you keep your cameras off for bandwidth issues. We also request that you please, throughout the webinar, send your questions to Dr. Vanessa Marshall via email so that we will group the questions and we will respond to them after the presentation. If we do not know the answer to a question, we will say so and get back to you with that information via FAQs that will be published at the same time as the webinar. Thus, if you send us your questions by email, we'll also be able to respond personally to you. The webinar is again being recorded, and that recording will be posted on the NIMHD website for future reference. And it will also be linked, our link to that website will be posted on the Tribal Health Research Office website as well. You are welcome to share the link to the recording and the slides broadly. Next slide, please. On this webinar today are the sponsors of this funding opportunity announcement that has been issued by the Office of the Director of the NIH, initiated by the Office of Data Science Strategy led by Dr. Susan Gregorek, in partnership with the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, whose director is Dr. Eliseo Perez-Stable, and the Tribal Health Research Office under the direction of Dr. Dave Wilson. The other members of this team are listed on this slide. Next slide here. Next slide, please. During this presentation, we will discuss the request for applications, objectives and expectations, the peer review process, the timeline for applications, and we will follow these by questions. These are questions about specific aims will not be addressed in this technical assistance webinar, because really the purpose of the webinar is to help you to prepare the best possible application you can submit and for us to assist you in that process. Next slide, please. So just to remind you that the Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics initiative was launched as a result of a congressional supplemental appropriation, and the language from that appropriation is posted here on the website, on this slide. That was signed into law on April the 24th of 2020. That allocation was more than $1 billion, and the focus of that was to direct research to point of care and other rapid testing, among other goals. Next slide, please. At a very high level, the goal of the RADx initiative was to accelerate innovation in and development, commercialization, and implementation of COVID-19 testing through a range of approaches. And these approaches included innovative diagnostic technologies, advanced late-stage diagnostic technologies to expand testing infrastructure, identify effective testing implementation strategies in underserved populations, and to work with other governmental agencies. 4 programs have been developed, and they are listed here. They're RADx Tech, RADx Advanced Technology Platforms, or RADx ATP, RADx Radical, or RAD, and RADx for Underserved Populations, which is the RADx UP, or RADx UP program. The funding and opportunity announcements for all of these programs are listed in the Related Notices section in the request for application. That's RFA-OD-22-011. And as the tribal data repository is intended to house the data collected in American Indian and Alaska Native communities for all of the RADx projects, it's important that you have a look at those related notices so that you'll understand what kind of data are being collected in the different RADx projects. The next slide, please. In preparation for this, it's been the NIH's interest and mission to participate in and to support the development of a RADx tribal data repository through getting consultation, holding consultations with the tribes, and with those tribes specifically that were funded through, for whom research are in which research was funded through the RADx initiative. And so these are the dates and the links to the tribal consultations that have been held with respect to this RADx tribal data repository. I do want to mention that hereafter I will refer to the RADx tribal data repository as the TDR, and they are one and the same. RADx TDR, RADx tribal data repository, or the TDR are all the same, and I will not differentiate between that. They're all the same thing. While the NIH has accelerated its research effort, it's also sought to and continues to seek ongoing tribal input through consultations in order to be appropriately respectful of tribal sovereignty and to address the needs of the American Indian Alaska Native communities participating in these programs. So these links are here for you. The next slide, please. The TDR will support and promote American Indian researchers and other scientists working with American Indian Alaska Native communities and contribute a better understanding of COVID-19 impact, provide data to allow for data-informed decisions and policy development in addressing the COVID-19 pandemic and potential future pandemics. Please note, no biospecimens will be stored within the RADx TDR. The TDR is intended to be independent from and not associated with the NIH or with NIH existing programs, such as All of Us, the All of Us program, or the National COVID Cohort Collaborative. This does not mean that there will not be NIH involvement, and I'll say more about that when we talk about the funding, the tool, the funding mechanism that was used to fund this, is being used to fund this grant. But it does, and that there will not be NIH oversight. There will be, as there is with all federal funded projects. But the data itself will not come to the NIH. The next slide, please. So the intention of developing a tribal data repository is for that TDR to be independent, by which we mean the data will not be housed at the NIH, but will be a central research data repository resource for researchers and their collaborators who are generating or interested in working with tribal and indigenous RADx research data, tribal data. while data housed by the individually funded data collection centers that are illustrated here for RADx Tech, RADx Rad, RADx Digital Health, and RADx Up, they're going to be housed separately. The TDR data will also be housed separately. The other data coordinating centers will deposit de-identified data into the NIH-held RADx Data Hub. And however, the Tribal Data Repository will serve as a central research data repository resource for researchers and their collaborators. In the course of the development of all of the RADx projects, specifically the RADx project to serve the underserved populations, the Coordination and Data Collection Center that was developed has developed or collected tools that were developed by the projects that were funded in the RADx UP initiative and other resources that can be leveraged by the TDR to facilitate communication, community engagement, data harmonization and data management, and other kinds of activities. And we are strongly encouraging that collaboration. The next slide, please. Here we are reminded that data should be collected and stored with regard for FAIR principles. That is, that the data be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. That CARE principles be used in the sharing of data. That is, that data should be used for the collective benefit, that those contributing data should also have the authority to control the data. The data sharing be done responsibly and with clear regard for ethical principles and considerations appropriate to the group, the individual, the culture, and the circumstances. In preparing the funding opportunity announcement, we've worked with the NIH Tribal Health Research Office to strengthen engagement based on trust between researchers and tribal nations and the NIH, to train researchers to responsibly and respectfully manage and share American Indian Alaska Native data, and to ensure that research practices align with laws, policies, and community partners. The data collected in the community can be used by the community to answer their own questions and to inform policy decisions. Next slide, please. So I'd like to turn now to really talk a little bit more about the initiative and to delve a little bit deeper into some of the things that we would like to see. This is a 4-year cooperative agreement that will focus on data storage, access, and monitored sharing of American Indian and Alaska Native RADx research data. The TDR is responsible for the overall coordination of data collection, management guidance, and support of RADx American Indian and Alaska Native data, including negotiating and executing data transfer, ownership, and use agreements, or DTOUA, with tribal nations and communities contributing data. The applicant to this FOA, or applicants to this FOA funding opportunity announcement, will propose and determine a process for review and approval for data access that results in the ability to provide data outcomes that inform the COVID-19 impact, work conducted through ongoing discussions with tribal nation leadership and other designated representatives from RADx Program American Indian, Alaska Native communities. Where possible, the TDR should coordinate with the RADx Up coordinating and data collection centers specifically for community engagement and other activities designed to create a community of practice. The next slide, please. There are 2 main required elements of these funding of these particular applications. The administrative operations and logistics and data collection, administrative operations and logistics, and data collection, integration, and data sharing. And these comprise the required elements of the proposal. The successful application will propose a plan for implementing a governance structure under principles and practices of tribal sovereignty. There are a number of examples that are in existence, both in American Indian and Alaska Native communities and in other communities, incarcerated populations, children with disabilities and so forth. We encourage you to have a look at those other structures and to propose what you think, what you know will work best for this particular purpose. The administrative operations and logistic functions primary responsibilities additionally include a plan to provide administrative, fiscal, and management oversight that comprise data sharing, access provision, regular weekly progress reporting, and evaluation tasks, and that build synergistically on resources developed specifically through the RADx UP, CDCC, and other RADx DCCs when possible, and prepare and distribute reports to the NIH. I'd like to make a comment there about the requirements for reporting for this initiative. Because this is a congressional allocation, because it is a very large congressional allocation, there has been a lot of requests for reporting to Congress and to the NIH leadership. The current RADx UP CDCC provides project status for each of the projects funded through the RADx UP initiative on a bi-weekly basis. This initially started as a weekly basis. People or project applicants who apply to this should expect a weekly cadence of progress reporting on all of the projects that are engaged in submitting data to the Tribal Data Repository. The cadence for these reports, these and other reports, can be expected to be frequent and as needed. In other words, we may find out that we need a report or need data for a report one day, and then we have a 1 or 2 day turnaround time period. So the pressure is on us as well as it's on you, and more than other projects, this is a collaborative enterprise. The data collection, integration, and data sharing function of the TDR includes establishment of a secure, centralized, user-friendly data repository that can accept de-identified individual participant data, including the assignment of unique participant IDs to protect the identification of the individual, and facilitate data standardization, harmonization, integration, and analysis for projects using RADx, American Indian, and Alaska Native data. And that encourages adherence to federal health data standards. A question has arisen regarding the potential for tribal nations to use the data to address questions of importance to the community. And this implies the ability of the TDR to support community leaders in the data access process, as well as in rigorous data analytic methods to use the data to inform policy and other data-driven needs. This is an important service that applicants to this FOA should consider providing. The next slide, please. Oh, cooperative agreements. Thank you. You're already on that slide. Super. A cooperative agreement is an assistance mechanism or assistance tool for supporting projects in which there is substantial NIH programmatic involvement with awardees. And this takes place during the performance of the activities to provide administrative, fiscal, and management oversight through the life of the grant. The NIH's purpose in using this mechanism is to support and stimulate the recipient's activities by involvement in and otherwise working jointly with the award recipients in a partnership role. It's not to assume direction or prime responsibility or a dominant role in the activities. The dominant role and prime responsibility resides with the recipients for the project as a whole. But there are specific tasks and activities that may be shared among the recipients and the NIH, and they're shared as defined. To establish a secure, centralized, user-friendly data repository that can accept individualized participant data, including unique participant identifiers, facilitate data standardization, and encourage adherence to federal data standards. Each party, as I said, in this partnership has responsibilities that are detailed in the funding opportunity announcement. This is a shared responsibility, and the shared responsibility is a requirement for funding. So please attend to those limitations. The project principal investigators and program directors have primary responsibilities for the implementation of the program. The NIH, in addition to the regulatory oversight of the program officer, assigns one or more project scientists to the project who work as members of the research team. That is, they would be included in your regular research meetings, and they work as colleagues, as research colleagues. This means that they can publish with the research team. And there are joint areas of responsibility, and those are, again, listed and outlined in the funding opportunity announcement. Please have a look at that. Next slide, please. I want to underscore something that will cause an application to be withdrawn unilaterally without review. If the application proposes studies in vertebrate animals, or if the application proposes the inclusion of biospecimens, it will be considered to be non-responsive to this funding opportunity and will not be reviewed. Next slide, please. These are key definitions that have been used, not just in this presentation, but also in the funding opportunity announcement. Please attend to them. They're there to try to clarify exactly what we mean by this funding opportunity announcement and to facilitate the work that you are doing. I'm going to now turn the presentation over to Dr. Marilyn Lodge-Sharp for consideration of review. Next slide, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dottie. Now I'm going to talk to you about the process of the peer review. So for the peer review, the application will be evaluated for completeness and compliance with the application instruction by the NIMHD program staff. The program staff from the participating offices and institute will assess the application for responsiveness to this RFA-OD-22-011. So the NIMHD scientific review branch will coordinate and manage the review of the applications. First, we'd like to say that a letter of intent to submit your application is not mandatory for you to send us, but it is not binding. And it's very helpful for our group to be able to organize this peer review. So a special emphasized panel will be formed and the administrative review of the application will be based on the 4-hour requirement and also the NIH peer review policy and procedures. For the scientific, so the scientific expertise of the reviewer will be based on the content of your application, and we will have at least 3 reviewers for each application. So 3 reviewers will be assigned for comments. A roster will be posted 30 days or approximately 30 days before the meeting, but please do not contact the member of the review panel or your application will be withdrawn if you do so. For the post submission material, you can you need to follow the instruction in the notice OD-22-011 and see what is allowable for you to do so. But you need to do it at least 30 days before the peer review meeting. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the reviewer will be considering the criteria that are described in section 5 of the FOA. This is the way that they will determine the scientific and technical merit. So please read this section very carefully. Make sure that the question included in section 5 are addressed in your proposal. In addition to the standard review question, make sure that the FOA specific question are also addressed. Next slide, please. So the application will be critiqued with the overall core in mind, including the normal 5 criteria: significance, investigators, innovation, approach, and environment. But again, I would like you to read very well the specific criteria for this specific FOA. The program goal, the mechanism-specific characteristic, and the criteria specific to the FOA's queries. Next slide, please. So in addition of the criteria, they are also important for you in your proposal to indicate the study timeline with detailed description, timeline feasibility and being justified, efficient and resourceful, discussion of challenges. Also, the human subject, protection of human subject against research risk. There are 5 criteria. Also, the ability to protect the identity of both individual study participant as well as tribal, nation, and community identity. This is very important since reviewer are the NIH is requiring reviewer to look at human subject and inclusion of, in this case, women and also the lifespan very carefully. Next slide, please. So the NIH utilized a 9-point rating scale, 1 being exceptional and 9 being poor. This is for all the application. The final score that you will receive will be based on an average of all the voting reviewers multiplied by 10. So your score will range from a 10 being exceptional and 90 being poor. A summary statement for all the application will be available approximately 30 days after the review meeting. Again, please do not contact the member of the review panel. Next slide, okay. Next slide, yes, thank you. So I think this is my last slide. So this is resources that you can look at about the peer review at NIH. And Dottie, please. Thank you. Let me.
Thank you, Marlene. Next slide, please. I'd like to talk to you now about the timeline for submission, review, and selection of applications.
Dottie, I hate to interrupt, but is there any way that you can put Vanessa's email up again? Because those who were not maybe present right at the beginning won't have access to it. So just to reiterate what Dottie had mentioned at the beginning, is that in order for us to better be able to more accurately pull all of your questions in that you might have throughout this presentation, so that we can do an FAQ later, we're asking that you actually email any questions you have, you can do throughout this presentation to Vanessa Marshall. So it would be Vanessa, as displayed up here, .marshall@nih.gov. And this will allow us, again, to capture your questions more effectively when we do an FAQ that will accompany this recording. And it also allows Vanessa to group the questions. So if there's 10 questions around the same subject, we're not answering the, that 10 times, rather we're only answering it once. So it will be at a better reflection. So hopefully everybody was able to grab that email address. Thank you, Dottie.
Oh, Sheila, thank you for the reminder. I really appreciate that. And you may be getting information that I'm not getting. So I just wanted to, we could actually leave that up on the board if you would like. I could mention to you the dates, the key dates for this. This is in the funding opportunity announcement, but just to bring this to your attention, the funding opportunity was posted on April the 6th of 2022. The optional letter of intent was due May the 1st. If you haven't submitted one and you'd like to, it certainly will be an aid to our review staff. It's neither binding nor is it mandatory. And if you submit it late, better late than never, that's totally fine too. The application due date is May 31st, and I want to say a couple of things about that application due date. There is only one application submission date. Start with submission of your application early. In the event that there are glitches, it will give you time to enlist ERA Commons for the help desk for assistance with application submission. There is no delayed submission for PIs who are members of standing review sections or panels with CSR or with an institute. And there is no HIV/AIDS submission, delayed submission date. Only one application date, May 31st, 2022. Review will take place in July of 2022, and secondary review will take place in August of 2022. Just a word about that. All of the projects funded through the RADx initiative have been selected for funding by the director of the NIH. In the past, that has been Dr. Francis Collins and Dr. Larry Tabak. As the acting director of the NIH, that final decision-making will go to Dr. Larry Tabak. That we don't expect that to be any different for this initiative, as this is part of the RADx overall congressional allocation, the RADx overall congressional allocation. The earliest start date for this project would be September of 2022. That means that we expect the funding will take place prior to the end of fiscal year 2022, which is the end of September. Next slide, please. Please don't hesitate to connect with us. If you need to talk about something about program with program implications, my name and phone number and address, email address is here on the slide. Better to email me than to call. Our review staff are Dr. Yvonne Navarro and Dr. Marilyn Lodge Sharp. Please don't hesitate to contact them about review issues and about economic issues. You would please contact Ms. Priscilla Grant. I'd like to turn it over now or open it up for Vanessa who has been collecting our questions to ask those questions. Vanessa?
So currently right now, I have not received any questions.
Okay. One of the questions that was received in the consultations earlier on and that has been forwarded to us this week prior, as we had requested questions prior to the review, was one about sustainability. And I want to mention what was said by Dr. Perez Stable in the consultation held earlier earlier on that was referred to earlier, and that is that this is an important initiative to the NIH. We see it as an important opportunity for the tribal communities contributing data and participating in the RADx data repository, and to please know that there's a will across the NIH for this to remain, or for funding to be sustainable. So Hale, I see that your hand is raised, but I can't unmute you. Would you please rather submit your question via email to Vanessa, vanessa.marshall@nih.gov, please. Thank you. We please understand that as a federal agency, the funding comes to us through a congressional allocation. We do not have control over that and cannot make any guarantees. But given the interest in across the NIH, as well as in Congress, in the continued funding of this initiative, we do expect that there will be a way to continue funding, and we're working on that now. Vanessa, have you received any, did you receive Dr. Khan's question by email yet?
No, I have not.
Are there any other questions? That please submit them by email. We would like to have that record, and so Hal, I'm hoping that you can please send that question right away to Vanessa so that we can have that. And that anyone who has questions, please submit them through Vanessa Marshall to us.
Okay, so I received one question. The question is, will the review committee include reviewers who have knowledge of tribal governance, of research and relative benefits and risks of tribal data repositories?
The review staff have requested that we recommend reviewers. We, meaning the program staff, recommend reviewers. The list of reviewers compiled by myself and others and sent to Dr. Navarro and Dr. Lott Sharp has been reviewers who are either members of, who are tribal investigators, American Indian, Alaska Native investigators, are non-Native investigators with extensive experience working in and reviewing applications for tribally focused grant mechanisms. For example, the intervention research in American Indian Health, or Native American Health, the IRENA program, and the NARCH program, the Native American Centers for, I'm sorry, Sheila, I'm butchering it, Native American Research Centers for Health. So we've really depended on those reviewers because of their experience with tribal sovereignty and the nation-to-nation legal relationship between the federal government and American Indian and Alaska Native tribes. So it's our intention that the panel will be made up exclusively of experienced researchers in that, with that specialization. Are there any other questions? Any other questions, Vanessa? Not yet?
Yes, another question. How are investigators to be reviewed, scored, if this FOA is meant to highlight community-led initiatives?
Investigators should, as is said in the, I believe in the funding opportunity announcement, need to, in their bio sketch as well as in the application, demonstrate through the research that they have conducted in the past with tribal nations, their expertise in working with tribal nations. In the bio sketch, an investigator can document that through the publications that, that discuss their community engagement and document community engagement. And in the application where the investigative team is described in the budget justification and other places, they can document the research expertise with tribal nations in the grant application itself. Next question.
And as a reminder, that it is expected in the application that the applicant, or if it's co-PI, they are explaining what process is going to be used or proposed to explain the process of working with the tribal nations in, in regards to the data repository. Since we don't know all of the tribal nations, the AIA and organizations that will be involved with the tribal data repository, as some are added and some may not want to participate, or additional ones join on with more RADx projects being funded. We obviously can't say exactly who should be involved in that process, but rather the applicant should be describing that process.
And in writing the funding, thank you, Sheila, that was great. And in writing the funding opportunity announcement, we've deliberately left it open for the applicant to describe the process that best fits their knowledge of these projects and their knowledge of the communities with which the projects are engaged. This is something that you know better than we do at the NIH. So it's for you to be proposing that process of continuing involvement of our tribal communities.
Okay, I have another question. Have all tribal nations that are participating in RADx agreed to share their data with the TDR?
As the TDR is not yet funded, that is not a requirement, nor is it a requirement for the tribal nations involved in the RADx projects to submit their data or to share their data with the TDR. We do know, however, that to date, 4 of the RADx projects being conducted in tribal nations have agreed to share their data with the RADx UP Coordination and Data Collection Center. It's anticipated that once the TDR is funded and ready to accept data, those data will be transferred. And please be aware that all of the data that RADx UP, CDCC, and the other data collection centers are collecting are de-identified data only, but that the American Indian Alaska Native data will be transferred to the TDR as should the projects agree to that data transfer. It would be with the tribal nations involved in those projects to give approval to the sharing of data with the TDR. Next question, or is there another question?
Yes.
Okay.
What entities are eligible to apply?
That also is listed in the funding opportunity announcement. In fact, I don't have it opened up for myself, but I will open it up. It's very, very clear. It's not just academic academic institutions, but also tribal organizations and tribal governments. And I believe if you look under the eligibility criteria, you will find a section that addresses eligible institutions, and you can possibly get that even quicker than I can pull it up. It says eligible organizations include higher education institutions, public state-controlled institutions of higher education, private institutions of higher education, including, and then there's a list, nonprofits and other institutions of higher educations, and then there are a list of 501(c), not-for-profit institutions, for-profit institutions, small business, for-profit organizations, state governments, county governments, city or township governments, special district governments, Indian, Native American, tribal governments that are federally recognized and other than federally recognized governments. And independent school districts, public housing authorities and Indian housing authorities, Native American tribal organizations other than federally recognized tribal governments, faith-based or community-based organizations, regional organizations. Clearly, there will be, tribal organizations are going to have the expertise, or may be more likely to have the expertise needed for this than non-tribal organizations. But this is in response, it's in the funding opportunity announcement. Next question.
That's all for right now.
Okay. Does anyone else have a question that they can quickly email to Vanessa, please? Please be aware in this funding opportunity announcement that clinical trials are not allowed. And that will be a problem if you propose a clinical trial. They're not allowed for this mechanism. There is a lot of information in the funding opportunity announcement and in the funding opportunity announcements for the related notices. Please be aware of that. We included those related notices because the TDR is to accept and manage data collected across the RADx initiative, across the NIH. So we'll need to be able to manage different kinds of data. And the different foci of those funding opportunity announcements are listed again in related notices, and there are quite a number of them. There is also additional information for the awardee on the NIH RADx funding page, and we included that in the slide deck early on. There is also extensive information about resources on the RADxUP.org page, RADx.-up.org, and there is an intention for there to be synergy between that Coordination and Data Collection Center, the RADx UP Coordination and Data Collection Center, and the Tribal Data Repository. Please be aware that we are not interested in having the TDR have to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of resources, and we're hoping that there can be some synergy with those resources. Are there any?
Okay. I have another question. Please. What is the amount of the award?
The amount of the award, also in the funding opportunity announcement, is $3 million per year for each of 4 years. So that $3 million includes indirect facilities and administration funds. So it's the direct cost of approximately $2 million per year plus indirect costs that would go to the institution, which comprises the entire $3 million per year for each of 4 years. And again, this is in the funding opportunity announcement under award information, funds available and an anticipated number of awards.
Hi, Adi.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Nathan. I think it's important to just let the any potential applicants know that the limit in direct cost is $2 million. Institutions have different indirect cost rates. So,
thank you.
You know, that gets calculated once you put in your application, once you identify your direct cost. And then your institution would add on the indirect cost rate. But the limitation is based on the direct cost in the application.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Vanessa, are there any other questions?
No.
We recognize that this is a very important initiative. It's important to our American Indian, Alaska Native tribal communities that are contributing to and taking part in the rapid acceleration of diagnostics initiatives across the NIH. And it's important to the NIH. We are concerned that you have the best opportunity possible to submit a successful application and are interested in providing the support you might need to do that. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for, to provide support.